how gorgeous. That is an aurora borealis, also known as the northern lights, which may be more familiar. Now, I don't have much information on the photographer of this picture, but it is an incredible photo, and I wanted to show it to you all. So hi, my name is Allie Park, and I am one of your fellow world geographers, and I'm about to present to you my climate and biome presentation, which is on, drumroll please, Iceland, specifically more of the lower southern coast that I will be focusing on. Now, Iceland is this little island here in red, if you can tell, and it lies in the northern hemisphere in the Atlantic Ocean. It is in between Greenland and Western Europe, and not so obvious, it is just below the Arctic Circle. Now, when you think of the size of Iceland, you think, well, it's a small little island country. But when you look at it on a map, it seems pretty big, right? Now, if you want a comparison, Iceland is 95 times smaller than the United States, with including Alaska, and probably about 95 times smaller than the amount of stress I put myself into recording this video. Anyways, Iceland's capital here, as you can tell, is pronounced as Reykjavik. Reykjavik's latitude and longitude coordinates are 64.9631 degrees north and 19.0208 degrees west. Now, since Iceland is so far north, it experiences something called the midnight sun, which occurs in the summer months around the June solstice. Now, the midnight sun is where the sun is up all day, or almost all day in Iceland's case. So if you follow this arrow, kind of hidden here to the left, and you imagine the Earth rotating, you can see how much daylight it gets. And this is due to it being so close to the North Pole when it is tilted towards the sun. Now, if you look to the other side, towards the right of the slide, you can imagine following this arrow, which is where my guess on where Iceland would be. And you can see when it rotates how dark it stays during it. Now, this is because when the North Pole is faced away from the sun during the December solstice. Now, even if Iceland is almost in the Arctic Circle, not all of the island has a tundra climate or ice cap climate as one may assume. Iceland's southerly western coast is considered on the Köppen climate classification as Marine West Coast Climate, CFC, or also known as subpolar oceanic. Now, the Marine West Coast climate tends to be on the west coast, with a couple random areas being towards the east. Kind of ironic, isn't it? Now, countries that have this climate include, but are not limited to, the United States, Australia, Iceland, Chile, New Zealand, and Western European countries, as the majority of this is quite covered, isn't it? Now, here is a lovely graph of Reykjavik, representing the average precipitation and temperature throughout the year. Now, if you're confused on this graph as much as I was, Iceland averages in the low 20s in the winter months and the upper 50s at most in the summer months for temperature. And it ranges between 2 to 4 inches of precipitation each month throughout the year, but it doesn't have no specific dry or wet season. Now, here on this graph, you can kind of see the more darker green areas around the coast. That is where a CFC climate is. Now, when you look towards the interior, you can see that's where the tundra and more cold dominate. And this is due to as the altitude goes up higher. Now, if you look at this graph and compare it to this one, you can see how similar they might be. This is because altitude is a factor that affects climates. Now, not only does this graph show the corresponding comparison, but it shows the location of the water system and glaciers as well. Not only does altitude factor into climate, but so does location and other combinations of specific things. Now, if you see in the red arrow here, a little bit hard to tell, this is where Iceland is. Iceland is affected by the polar easterlies, and is near the boundary of where the polar easterlies and mid-latitude westerlies meet. Now, these two different temperature air masses affect the precipitation and can often develop low-pressure cyclones near the area. Now, Iceland's CFC climate type is also affected by the warmth brought up from the Gulf Stream. It brings this warmth through the Gulf Stream, through the North Atlantic Current, and wraps around this westerly coast of Iceland. Now, with all these factors, the weather can often change suddenly and quite frequently, kind of like my mood swings. But now, did you know, since the Middle Ages, Iceland has a third of the world's lava flow? This is because Iceland, right here, sits over a section of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a spreading center between the North American and the Eurasian plate. Now, this is a divergent boundary where they go away from each other. And this makes all this rising hot magma go up and go through volcanoes to create such this immense lava flow. Cool, right? Now, as interesting as Iceland's climate is, the biome is even more interesting in my opinion. Iceland has a boreal forest biome, also known as a taiga. Even if some regions, specifically in the higher altitudes, have an alpine highland biome, I'll focus more on the boreal forest today. Now, the boreal forest ranges in the northern hemisphere in places like Canada, Russia, Alaska, and a few more. It is only in the northern hemisphere since the equator is quite warm and the southern hemisphere doesn't have much land to be considered that biome. Now, although Iceland is quite small and not very diverse, many of its creatures are very uniquely adapted and different from any other creatures in the world. What I have featured here to the left is the Atlantic puffin, where 8 to 10 million, over 60% of all Atlantic puffins inhabit the island. And to the right is the famous Icelandic horse, which have been purebred in Iceland for over 1,000 years, and even developed some of its own type of gaits. Now, if you're confuzzled, as I like to say, gaits is a specific way something walks or runs. Now, as famous and as purebred as the Icelandic horse is, it is not native. The only true native land animal to Iceland is the Arctic fox, which is here. How cute and fuzzy. Now, Iceland also has many native water species and fish. Such species include whales, orcas, seals, and Iceland was once home to a unique subspecies of walruses. But walruses had vanished or were killed off by the mid-14th century, just 500 years after the arrival of Norse settlers. Now, since Iceland has a boreal forest biome, you think there'd be quite a lot of trees and forests, right? Not really. Iceland only has 1 to 2% of forest cover, and it was once at 40% before the Vikings settled here and needed all that lumber for their personal use. Iceland also has 10% of its land covered by glaciers, but within the past century, that glacier cover is declining due to global warming. Now, as beautiful as the landscape and the creatures are in Iceland, Iceland also has much beauty in its color. Now here, I will present to you the Icelandic flag. This flag represents the physical and cultural beauty of the island. Iceland is considered one of the safest countries in the world, and the majority of its citizens are happy and one of the happiest countries of all. Now, some reasons to Icelandic's happiness and safety is that there is much equality amongst the people. Men and women are seen as equal in wealth, as it is illegal to pay someone more based on their gender. They also have equality when it comes to maternal or paternal leave. Now, Iceland is also inclusive on gender, sexuality, trans rights, and more. Not one of their pride parades have ever been protested against. Now, Iceland is also very smart. It has a 99% literacy rate, and an incredible 1 out of 10 people living in Iceland will publish a book. Now, if you watched the lecture on 6, when we watched presentation tips, you saw his Costa Rica presentation. Now, similar to Costa Rica, Iceland has no military. They are the only member of NATO without one. And another characteristic Iceland shares with Costa Rica is that 95% of its energy come from renewable sources. The two main sources are hydropower and geothermal power. However, they recently have been diving into more solar and wind power and experimenting with permafrost and rocks. Finally, to end this presentation, this is another beautiful picture of Iceland's magnificent landscape. There are so many unique adaptations, both environmentally and culturally. Today, Iceland is doing their best efforts to fix the past damages that have affected the land and life. We need a future that is healthy and beautiful like Iceland. So remember, make wise choices and think about picking up that piece of garbage you saw in the corner of your eye. Thanks for watching.